All right, y'all. I'm back with another one. I'm in a different setup, obviously. It is raining right now in my office, and my office has a tin roof, so it's so freaking loud, dude. It's annoying. So we're doing this one in the house. Um, but I want to go over this video. This channel is great, man. This channel is called Proactive Thinker, dude. So you guys check this channel out. This guy's great. And this video is Trump's plan to save the dollar and to crash China's economy. He goes through this so beautifully, man. It's great, dude. And I'm excited to go through this video with you guys. So let's do it.
The United States of America is planning to crush the entire Chinese economy. This is the plan that the United States has been preparing for years. Everything that Donald Trump is doing seems very chaotic. On one side, he's capturing the president of Venezuela. On the other side, he's starting a blockade against Iran. On the third side, who knows what he's going to do tomorrow. But what if I told you that there is a grand strategy behind everything that Trump is doing? Now, in this video, it might seem like I'm defending Donald Trump. It might seem I'm trying to make a hero out of Trump. But in reality, this is not just Trump's plan. This is the plan of the United States. And I'm not defending this plan. I'm merely explaining to you so that you know how to take advantage out of it. When you look at Donald Trump...
Right. He's very level-headed, too. He's not... I cannot tell either way the biases, honestly. So, which is good. Those are the channels that I'm looking for. That's where I like to get my information. Because although I personally lean more towards conservative or whatever, I definitely don't define myself as a liberal or Democrat. But there's a lot of issues I have with the conservative side as well. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. But I always like to find neutral sources because that's how you really figure out what's going on. You know what I mean? So this, again, I trust him. He's good.
There is a long strategy, but we have to understand that the strategy or the goal of the strategy at the end of the day is to win the race against China because there is a financial and economic competition between the United States and China. But if you look at Trump's tweets, it seems like he's all over the place. He's tweeting 24/7 nonsense about everything. But here's what you have to understand.
Which I believe is a strategy. You know, I believe he's doing that on purpose.
About America. To stay in power in the US, you need to control the narrative. If you don't control the narrative, the American media is going to eat you alive. When you look at countries such as China and Russia, the media is controlled by the state. So whoever is in power doesn't actually have to go to the Twitter and keep reminding everybody about the narrative of the story. The media is going to...
Which I think is a big advantage that China has. I mean, when you can lead a country anywhere or any direction that you want and face zero pushback from your own country, that's a big advantage. You know, and although democracy is great, that's also one of, I wouldn't even say the downfall, because in some cases that's a good thing to get pushback. Well, in most cases, I think it's a pretty good thing to get pushback. But it also can be used as a disadvantage when the country is so divided as we are right now. So
you do that because the media is controlled by the state. But that's not the case in a democracy. That's not the case in the United States. If Donald Trump and the White House are going to lose the grip on controlling the narrative of the story, what is going to happen? The media is going to eat Donald Trump alive. And Donald Trump knows that because he has been in the media for a long time. Yeah. He knows America probably better than most Americans. And that's why when you go to his Twitter or to his Truth Social post, he is basically saying everything all around. And at first, it seems like Donald Trump is making a deal with himself, but that's his way to manipulate the public to control the narrative and stay in power and actually achieve his objectives. And some people will say, well, that's not effective. He's telling a lot of nonsense. Now, let's be honest. That strategy got him the presidency in 2016, And that strategy actually got him the presidency the second time. So we know for a fact that strategy actually works, which is why he's using that strategy. He knows that his public enemy number one is the media, because the media is also controlled by other powers, by other wealthy people who will continue attacking him whether he likes it or not. And some people might say, well, Fox News is on his side. Well, the reason that Fox News is on the side of Donald Trump is because it's in the interest of Fox News. If it wasn't in the interest of them, they wouldn't actually defend Donald Trump to begin with. So if you look at the United States, you will see that in 1991, when the Cold War against the Soviet Union ended, the United States had monopoly on power on the rest of the world. And if you look at the world since 1990s, there wasn't a single power that could even challenge the United States of America. When China would say something, the US aircraft carriers would come to the Strait of Taiwan and will tell China that it's time to calm down, there is nothing you can absolutely do. When Russia would say something, the Americans would remind the Russians that you guys lost the Cold War and we are controlling the world right now. And that actually lasted for many, many years, up until around 2016, when a new Cold War started. This is when the United States of America genuinely realized that if we are going to go on this trajectory, sooner or later, the US economy is no longer going to be the largest economy, which means that we cannot fund the world's largest military, which means that we no longer have a monopoly on the global power. So we have to do something. So the public enemy number one is going to be China, because we want to crush the Chinese economy. And this is not something that the United States realized out of nowhere. For around 15 years, the United States has accused China of currency manipulation. Now ask yourself, why would the United States do that to China? Because that was the strategy to crush the Chinese economy. So the final goal is that to establish another monopoly of the United States on the rest of the world. First of all, we want to break the Chinese economy, and we want to make Russia dependent on the United States. The problem is that China wants to lead its region and Russia wants to lead its.
And if you flip Iran and you take control, if we take over the Strait of Hormuz, you will do both those things simultaneously. The Russia, obviously the China thing, I think is pretty easy to put together. The fact that they buy 90% of Iran's oil, which equivalates to 30% or 40%, I think, maybe it's 40% of China's oil. Well, they buy it at an extreme discount. They buy their oil at an extreme discount, right? So if you cut that off, that's a huge blow to China, okay? And then we control Russia's oil with sanctions. So
region as well. So let's ask ourselves a very simple question. What makes the China such a great, strong economy? China is the global factory of the world. So China has been producing everything at such a mass scale. China has so much people that they have economies of scale. Let's take Amazon and let's take a very new company that is getting into the same business. Now, Amazon can crush any business in its industry. Why? Because Amazon has economies of scale. Amazon can charge you $10-15 for overnight deliveries. No one else can do that. But $10-15 is absolutely nothing. The reason that Amazon can do that is because they have economies of scale. So what China has done over the last 40 years is that they have built economies of scale when it comes to manufacturing. So it doesn't matter how much the United States is going to try. China will be able to manufacture that at a lower price. So when we have a free market, which is literally what America is all about, a free market, capitalism, in that case, all American companies sooner or later will go back to China because it's simply much more cost effective to manufacture in China. That's not just about the US companies, that's about all companies across the globe. And that is the power that China has. But all these factories are running on oil and gas. Without energy, you don't have these factories. So the primary interest of China is to bring down oil prices because you want to continue funding this.
I will say though that China is like the leading force in renewable energy. So that's why they manufacture so much batteries. I think they don't. How did they do something like some crazy number, like 70% of the world's batteries come from China or something insane like that? So That's the only thing, but obviously they're still very reliant on oil and gas, of course. So I just wanted to throw
factories,
that out there.
which is why China needs cheap oil to make that possible. Now, China leads the world
Oh,
in batteries and renewable
yeah.
energy because China knows that it doesn't simply have enough oil and gas to sustain itself like the United States and Russia, which is why it has been aggressively investing to become
That, and I'm sure that they knew that if we would to like strategically, the U.S. was going to try to cut off China's oil. So I'm sure they knew that they were vulnerable there, obviously. So they were trying to prepare for that.
the world's best manufacturer in renewable energy. China today produces about 90% of all the batteries in the
Yeah,
world.
my boy.
China today
Oh
leads the
shit.
world in renewable
90%. I thought it was 70. 90%. That's crazy.
energy because it
That's
wants
not good, bro. If they were to cut that off, that would be, man. No wonder why that makes sense then why Elon is does so much business with China and he's so close to China, right? I mean, 90% of the batteries come from China. That's crazy. That's a lot, bro.
to reduce its dependence on oil and gas. Yes, these factories might continue needing oil and gas, but if the rest of the economy doesn't actually need them, we can actually get some of this oil and gas and still fund our factories. China's energy dominance goal is that we want to lead the world in renewable energy, and we also want to control the Middle Eastern oil and create petro yuan. So in that way, we're actually depending the world on our renewables, and because we're providing the security and the protection for the Middle East, we control their oil. So basically, we will have this global superpower when it comes to energy. That is the grand strategy that China has.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. Describe what you want.
So here is the plan or the master plan the United States has to crush the Chinese economy. The first strategy was that we want to stop China from currency devaluation, or we want China to devalue its currency to turn it into Japan 2.0. Now let's go back to pre-Trump. You would hear a lot Obama saying that we're accusing China of currency manipulation. China should stop devaluing its currency. This is before Trump. This is not Donald Trump. Now ask yourself, why would the United States do that? And that's because when you're exporting a lot of goods, your currency becomes extremely strong. And that means that now your exports no longer are going to be as competitive as they have been in the past. And China knows that it is going to slow down their economy, so they have been artificially devaluing their currency. Now, the United States of America has also been doing that in a slightly different way through quantitative easing. But here's the point is that if we actually accuse China and China stops devaluing their currency, their economic slowdown or their economy will slow down. And over time, it will basically stagnate, just like Japan did. That's how the United States destroyed the Japanese economy. They forced Japan to overvalue their currency. Their exports overnight became so extremely expensive and their economy have been stagnating. And Japan, since 1990s, their economy has collapsed by more than 35%. So for the last 35 years, the Japanese economy is going down. But that strategy did not work with China. China perfectly understood the risk, so they did not want to do that, which is why the United States of America now is going to implement Plan 2.0 or Plan B. And the Plan B is that control global energy and raise prices so that manufacturing will no longer be cheap in China. China is able to manufacture all of that with cheap energy because the world enjoyed cheap energy for a very, very long time. But what if we make energy very, very expensive? Not extremely expensive, but just expensive enough so that American consumers will be able to absorb it, but manufacturing is no longer going to be that good of idea in China. In fact, at that energy prices, maybe companies will come back to the United States because it is simply going to be cost effective.
Which is kind of what's happening, right? I mean, we cut out China's oil. Now, obviously, they have reserves, so I'm sure they'll be fine for a while. But eventually, it's going to become a major issue. And fuel prices have gone up in the States, obviously, but to me, it seems like it is manageable right now. And then again, I don't know with it escalating. I mean, it could turn very sour pretty quick. So I mean, I don't know. We'll see.
Difference in the money that you're going to save from manufacturing in the US or moving your factories to China is simply going to be so tiny that you're not going to risk it that much. And if you look at the GDP per capita, the US GDP per capita is much higher than China, so a slight increase in energy prices, the United States can easily absorb that cost, while it's going to be very heavy on China. So here is the plan. The United States is reshaping the entire energy market all across the globe. And this started, by the way, before Donald Trump even was the president for the second time. This was the strategy all along. First of all, we have countries that are major producers of oil, such as Russia, Canada, the US, and Venezuela. Now, Venezuela for now is not the largest producers, but they have the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And then you have also
They have the largest oil reserves in the world, but their their refineries or how they pump it out is just garbage, I guess. Like it's all like very poorly maintained. Most of it is broken and it needs to be repaired, and it's just they literally are just like have given up, on their oil. So.
Middle East. And then you have the largest consumers of energy, which is Europe, China, India. These are the largest players in the market or in the world, I would say. First of all, the first part of the strategy is that Europe was entirely dependent for oil and gas from Russia. Like if you, for example, go before the 2022, Europe was entirely dependent on Russia. And that was not something that the United States of America actually liked. So the United States has perfectly used the war in Ukraine in order to force Europe to actually diversify. Yes, Europe still buys energy from Russia, but it also buys a lot of energy from the United States. In fact, it buys far more energy from the US than in Russia and then the rest of the world. So the United States of America has successfully broke the Russian monopoly on the oil in Europe. The second thing that the United States has actually done that is that it put a blockade on the Middle Eastern oil. Now, at first, this blockade makes no sense or whatsoever, but there is a really, really good strategy behind it. Middle East is responsible.
I don't understand why people say that. Like the blockade always made sense to me, and it to me, I didn't understand why we didn't do it the second that they blocked. Like when they blocked our allies from selling oil, I was like, well, why don't we just, why are we letting them sell oil? Like, why would we not just block their stuff? Now, to be fair, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a genius. I didn't realize how deep it went and how big of a chess move that was. I just thought, I was like, well, that's weird. Like, why are we just letting them sell oil? Like, just cut their supply out. Like, don't let them make any money, But, yeah. Anyways, it's crazy, dude. Like, and again, people do a little bit of Trump dick riding, and they say, "Oh, he's playing 4D chess. He's playing 4D chess." And I've been right there with him, making fun of these guys. I'm like, oh my goodness, like it's just cope. But now I'm starting to be like, damn, is he playing 4D chess? Like, this is kind of crazy.
Responsible for 40% of the global oil, almost 40%, it's like 37% or so, but 20% of that oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz.
And it's not on him, by the way. I don't want to give all the credit to Trump because obviously, in this video, he's telling like, hey, this has been in effect long even before Trump. So it's not all Trump, he was just talking about Obama a couple minutes ago. So again, it's interesting.
Now, since the Strait of Hormuz is closed under the pretext that Iran should not have a nuclear weapons, and now Iran is like, as long as you have the blockade over there, we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz. And that means that the Middle Eastern oil right now is no longer actually flowing to the rest of the world, including India, including China. It's basically stuck. So right now, even though if you kind of look at this, it is the Iranian that are calling the shots whether to open the Strait of Hormuz or not. But it's actually the United States of America. Because obviously, if the United States wants the Middle Eastern oil...
And that's my biggest beef with Byron, bro. Like he goes on here and he talks about how U.S. has no cards and Iran has the U.S. by stranglehold. I'm like, you do realize that like we say when Iran can start selling oil or not, so.
To hit the global markets, it can basically stop the blockade and that oil will go. But if the United States will not stop the blockade under the pretext that we cannot reach an agreement with Iran, it means that this Middle Eastern oil is no longer hitting the global markets. So the US has full control over it. The United States also controls the Russian oil. Wait a second. What are you smoking? What do you mean that the US controls the Russian oil? The United States put sanctions on Russia. And now, when there was a shortage of the Middle Eastern oil in the market, the United States lift the sanctions on the Russian oil. Now you can go and buy the Russian oil.
Dude,
when it's no longer in the interest of the United
crazy.
States, we're going to put the sanctions back so you cannot buy the Russian oil. It is so convenient. So basically, yes, Russia is kind of independent in selling their oil to whomever they want. But because of our sanctions, we control how much of that oil is going to hit the international market or not. So essentially, the United States, through these sanctions, actually control the Russian oil. Now, we might say that, oh, they put the sanctions on Russia because they want to protect Ukraine or whatever. But in reality, this is a really good power in the hand of the United States. So maybe there is going to be another crisis tomorrow, and the United States of America will say, okay, now you can buy the Russian oil. But until this point, when we're going to fix the problem, once we have fixed the problem, once we have increased the production in the US, we put the sanctions back so you come back and buy the American oil. It is so convenient. So if you kind of zoom out for a moment, you realize that the United States of America controls the Venezuelan oil right now, and soon it's going to be one of the largest exporters in the world because basically Venezuela is now controlled by the United States of America. The United States controls its own oil. The United States controls the Canadian oil. I mean, Canada is going to sell to whomever the United States is going to allow. And they're primarily going to sell it exclusively in the US dollar. The United States also controls the Russian oil and the Middle Eastern oil. So now, the people or the countries that consume oil and don't have much oil.
Look at that, bro. That is insane, man. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Like Europe, China, and India entirely rely on the will of the United States, whether they will get that oil or not. So basically, the United States created a complete control over the oil market in the world. If you think this was by accident, then you have no idea what you're thinking about, because this is probably or most likely was pre-planned to make it like this, so that the United States of America will have full control over the global oil. So the United States...
That's what I'm saying. Either Trump is like the smartest dude in the world or the luckiest dude in the world. Okay? And again, I'm not trying to say this is all Donald Trump, because this is something that's been in effect for a long time. Okay? Obviously. So it's America's plan. It's not Trump's plan, but Trump is carrying it out, and it's crazy to see.
Basically broke the Russian energy monopoly in Europe. China no longer can buy cheap oil from the Middle Eastern countries. So now, China, you can buy oil from Middle East. And you probably have seen the news that there are Chinese tankers that actually crossed the American blockade and actually brought oil from Iran or the Saudi Arabia to China. But that's a couple of ships a day. It is not going to actually fix the Chinese energy problem, because there are mines in the entire Middle East. Until this conflict is not going to be over, Iran is not going to take all of these mines out of the Strait of Hormuz. So previous energy supplies are never going to be restored. Which means that, again, the United States of America actually controls whether that oil or most of that oil will hit the international markets or not. And that is why now China is at the mercy of the United States. And now China is overpaying for the Russian oil. Wait a second, what do you mean? You see, there are different benchmarks to price oil. So you have, for example, West Texas Intermediary. This is basically the price of the American oil. Currently, it's about $83. So when you're buying American oil, this is the benchmark that you look at. The second benchmark is the Brent crude oil.
So whenever somebody pushbacks on the fact that like the blockade is affecting America because our gas is more expensive over here, it's more expensive for China. like China's getting hit worse than we will ever get hit. So
this is mostly the rest of the world and also the Middle Eastern oil. Currently, it is priced at $90. And then you have Urals oil. The Urals oil is the price for the Russian energy, is the price for the Russian
and it was
oil.
The highest. Look.
And if you look at the Russian
$114. And this one was at 90. I don't know what the other one was at.
oil, even though that oil prices globally has dropped to $90, the Russian oil is still trading at around $114. Why is that the case? Why wouldn't these Chinese countries or the China and India would just go and buy the Middle Eastern oil? Or why wouldn't they just go and buy the American oil? The problem...
American oil, 83. What is that? Crude. I don't know where this was from. I can't remember what it's... USD... whatever, and it doesn't matter. America, whatever this one is. So 83.90, they gotta buy the $114 oil, bro. That's crazy.
It's not. Over the last month or so, China has actually used a lot of their strategic reserves. And right now, the country is extremely desperate and is ready to overpay for oil in order to fill back those strategic reserves. So India and China are massively buying the Russian energy and are overpaying for it while it's possible, because temporarily the United States of America has actually lifted the sanctions from Russia, which is why that huge demand is keeping the Russian energy extremely.
I wonder what would happen if they put the sanctions in. Like, what the hell would China do? I mean, they'd have to buy it, right? They'd have no choice. That's crazy. So it's at $114 without the sanctions. I mean, I'm sure there's some sanctions still in place, but they've lifted, I guess, a lot of them. Dude, that is insane, man. What the hell is China going to do? I mean, I will say this about China. I have a hard time believing that they're just going to take this lying down. So I do believe that there is some kind of retaliation they're thinking about doing. Unless this really just is checkmate. Like, I don't know, bro. I don't know. But I feel like China is going to try to do something. And again, maybe they're thinking that with their oil reserve and with them refilling it with the Russian oil and the fact that they are the biggest manufacturers of batteries. I mean, I wonder, like, if they cut off batteries, I wonder how that would affect us. You know, how much batteries we import from China. I don't know, man. I don't know.
High, which is why Russians right now are making a lot of money. So here's the problem, that the Middle Eastern oil is trapped in Middle East and is not actually out. So good luck creating petrol yuan when the Middle Eastern oil cannot get out. Yes, for example, China can convince Saudi Arabia to sell its oil exclusively in yuan.
Saudi Arabia just made a deal with America to get a dollar swipe line. And I did some research on it because it's a little confusing to me, but from what I understand, it's a direct line of credit. Like, you're talking about the central bank and all that shit, but for the most part, it's a direct line of credit. And I'm like, okay, I do not believe, because Saudi Arabia was the only one that I was like, I don't know about over there in the Middle East. Obviously, Iran is totally China. Like, they're all for the petrol, yuan and or UN or whatever the fuck they call it, right? The Chinese currency, whatever. And Saudi Arabia was the only one that I was like, I don't know. Like, there's talks about it. I've heard rumors. But if they're asking America, Trump, for a direct dollar swap line, bro, I mean, why would they do that if they're gonna go over to China? You know what I mean? So.
But how are you going to get that oil out of Saudi Arabia, out of Kuwait, out of the United Arab Emirates, out of Qatar, through the Strait of Hormuz when the strait is actually closed? So you cannot possibly do that. But that raises another question. Why the United States doesn't care about friends? Saudi Arabia is a close friend of the United States and other countries in the region as well. Here's what Henry Kissinger once said. It may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal. They are no longer in the interests of the United States. The United States is changing its entire strategy. So if these countries are going to suffer as a result of that...
Nah, I don't buy that. I don't think that they're just like, whatever, y'all are going to have to deal with it. I think there's a lot of people who just are tired of Iran, and they want Iran just to be done with. So I think they see the silver lining. I think they see, okay, you know what? This is gonna suck. We'll have to deal with it, but at the end of the day, it will be better for everybody involved other than Iran, and if you find yourself on that side of the alliances, right? And then Iran is just, or not Iran, Saudi Arabia just asked for, a direct line of credit too. So we wouldn't be working with them like that if it was like, oh, fuck it, And Saudi Arabia has been hit the most out of everybody when it comes to Iran shooting them. Like, I think it was like Iran one of the first targets that they hit when this all popped off was, and I might get this wrong, but it was Saudi Arabia, and it was their biggest oil refinery or oil reserve or something like that. It was a huge hit to them. So again, I don't think we're just like, oh, fuck it, y'all are gonna have to figure it out. I think they understand what's going on, and they're like, okay, we'll deal with it. Because I don't know. I just feel like there would be more talks about it, with all the anti-Trump shit going on and the anti-war stuff and all the anti-American stuff. They would not let that go unnoticed. You know what I mean? Like, you would be hearing about it. So I don't know.
It is their problem. This is not, again, what Donald Trump said. This is not, again, what current Secretary of the State said. This is literally what Henry Kissinger said, who actually served as the Secretary of the State back in the 20th century. So here's the most important question: how to crush China's economy and bring manufacturing back to the United States. If you look at each country that is producing and manufacturing oil, you can see that it costs differently in different countries. In Saudi Arabia, it costs about $3 to $10 the lifting cost, and then by the time you get it to the market, it can cost you anything between $15 to $25.
That's crazy.
Why? Because
$15 to $20, $15 to $25. So Russia's 40 to 55. Look at that, US, bro. $55 to $70, which I remember that because I remember people always saying, oh, you don't make any money until it's like $80 a barrel. Then you're making, but that's only $10, so I don't know. Canada, that's crazy though. Canada is $65 to $75. I did not expect that because they sell so much oil. That's kind of crazy.
Saudi Arabia is filled with oil. It is a desert. Getting oil out of the ground is extremely cheap, which is why it's much more cheaper for them to extract that oil. So they make a lot of money by selling this oil to the rest of the world.
Shit.
But that's not the case across the globe. If you look at the Kuwaiti, it's a little bit more expensive. Russia needs about $15 to $30, and then by the time it gets it to the market, it costs anything between $40 to $55. The US needs a lot more than that because the United States primarily has a lot of oil that is very difficult to extract. So it costs between $30 to $50, and by the time it gets to the market, it can cost up to $55 to $70. So oil companies in the US are not making as much money as oil company in Saudi Arabia. Why? Simply because extracting oil in the United States and getting into the market is simply much more expensive than it's in Saudi Arabia. Which is why if these countries will bring down oil prices to the bare minimum, you will see that energy companies in the United States will begin to suffer. Why? Because it is no longer financially viable for them to make so much money. If oil is being traded at $50, only the largest companies in the US will actually survive. They will make very, very thin margins on these businesses. Venezuela, the story isn't actually that great. The same thing you can say about Canada and Brazil. So here's the plan. The United States wants to keep energy prices at about $80. Why? It is going to keep American refineries to make a lot of profit. And at the same time, all these nations that actually could easily make a lot of money out of them, their oil is going to be trapped in the entire Middle East because the Strait of Hormuz is actually closed. And that high energy prices, yes, it is going to hit the global economy. It might actually cause recessions in some part of the world, and it is going to lead to higher gas prices in the United States of America. But the US can actually absorb $80 per barrel. But China, it is going to be very difficult for them, especially for the factories. So China will not collapse as a result of this, but manufacturing in China will certainly slow down. So if you're a factory in China and then oil prices will stabilize at around $80 because the Middle Eastern oil is being trapped, yes, a lot of factories will survive. But a lot of factories on the other side are not going to survive. So the Chinese GDP growth is certainly going to slow down as a result of this. And China will be dependent on the United States for energy, or it will have to overpay for the Russian energy. Look at the Russian market. You're paying $114, or you will simply be buying the US energy and you will be dependent on the United States. So currently, China controls the rare earth minerals around the globe, and there are critical industries that China is controlling, and China is literally trying to compete with the United States. But if China will depend on the United States for oil and gas, imagine how much leverage the United States will have over China. And that is the position the United States wants to see itself when it's negotiating.
Maybe that's it. You know, when I said the thing about China, I do know that China controls a lot of the precious metals. And if China isn't like crazy dependent on oil because they are the leading country in developing renewable energy, I don't know. Maybe that's enough to balance it to where they're not going to be too affected by this. But I don't know, man. I don't see how it's not going to raise the cost of manufacturing. And I think that's going to be the biggest hit towards China. Like, you can control all the precious metals you want, but if your manufacturing goes away, that's your bread and butter. Like, I think everybody knows that. That's China's bread and butter. Like, they're the manufacturers of the world. So, I don't know, man. It's going to be very interesting.
China. It is China that is dependent on the United States and not vice versa. And the US also doesn't like it that China is getting all this cheap energy from Russia while the United States is overpaying for energy. We have to flip the script. We have to flip the entire system. So what is the outcome you're getting out of all of this? So this strategy at first makes no sense because when you go to Trump's tweets, nothing actually makes sense. But what is the final outcome? Europe no longer depends on Russian energy, so the United States broke that monopoly. Russian energy is controlled by the United States, so the United States now can basically say, okay, now the world, you can buy it, tomorrow you cannot buy it. The United States of America will decide how much energy and how much money Russia is going to make from selling oil and gas. Middle Eastern energy is also controlled by the US. If Middle Eastern countries will please the United States of America, then maybe the United States of America will decide to stop this blockade so that Iran will take out these mines out of the Strait of Hormuz, and this energy will actually hit the international markets. But if they won't, then the blockade will stay there. Maybe there is going to be a ground invasion. Fourthly, petrol yuan is now impossible under these circumstances. You can forget about the idea of petrol yuan. It's not going to happen under these kind of circumstances. China depends on the United States and Russia for energy. So that is the position that the US wants China to be. Because right now, it is Russia that actually needs China. Because Russia has been isolated due to sanctions, and it was selling its oil under market price for China, and China has actually been reaping the rewards, reaping the profit. They're actually buying so much cheap energy, which has been fueling their economy, which has been fueling their entire AI industry. But now China is in this position, either buy expensive energy from Russia or be dependent on energy on the United States. And manufacturing will slow down in China. And these are the objectives that Donald Trump is going to achieve with this strategy. Now, I know that this sounds like I'm getting too much credit to Donald Trump, but you have to understand that the United States of America doesn't just work based on who is the president. The United States of America has a long-term objective to have monopoly on the rest of the world. So you have the CIA, you have the FBI, you have the strategy of the country, and whoever is the president is simply going to be the person who is going to implement these strategies one way or another. So whoever is going to win that. So basically, right now, the president of the United States is Donald Trump, and he knows that, or maybe he's basically the perfect person to be the president because he can implement all of these strategies, and at the same time, he's actually controlling the narrative and keeping himself at the top. It doesn't mean that he's right. I'm not actually defending his strategies. I'm basically telling you that based on all the factors that we have on the ground right now, this is what it looks like, and these are the objective of the United States. But at the same time, it's also going to present us with very unique opportunities to make a lot of money. There are a lot of people who profited from the price of gold over this time. There are a lot of people who profited from the price of oil all this time. There are a lot of people profited from the stock market. While you're watching and you're seeing these events, the smart people are actually planning, and they know how to profit from these events. So if you want to know how do you actually make a lot of money out of these events that are happening right now, you have to educate yourself financially. So if you want to know what are the best stocks to buy right now, then check out the Investing Academy. The link is going to be in the description of this video.
Beautiful video.
Never sue.
I love it, dude. My boy, Proactive Thinker. Y'all check him out. View his channel. Subscribe if you like his stuff. I love his stuff. He's very balanced. He's very educated, man. He's very educated. Good stuff. Yeah, man. We taking over. Yo, US ain't going nowhere, dude. This is cool. But I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and making it out to the end. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.